Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it's time for the Q&A, so let's go ahead and get this started. Alright, first question. Your thoughts on having medial knee pain from sumo deadlifts, specifically on the lockouts when knees are fully locked? Thanks. Well, if you're having knee pain on it there, it's probably not just the lockout, that's where you're feeling it. But I can tell you if you're getting that pain there on the inside of the knee, you probably have weak adductors. Okay, that's your issue. How do we get around that? Box squats. And that's something that I'm going to sound like a broken record sometimes, talking about why we need to box squat, why you should box squat, why it should be your primary squat. But let's talk about the sumo deadlift. Okay, a wide stance, correctly done box squat is almost a perfect replication of the lower body movement of your sumo deadlift. However, we can handle very large amounts of volumes of box squatting. We can use it to build all of that musculature up. The issue that people have with wide stance stuff, and this is why you'll see guys like Louis Simmons or Winning or whatever say that training wide will carry over to narrow, but narrow will not carry over to wide. And the reason a lot of people see that and say, well, I don't understand, it should be specificity. Well, no, because wider stance uses more muscles in the lower body than a narrow stance does. And notice I didn't specify squat or deadlift. I mean, the idea is the same. But let's look at a squat, because a deadlift is always just going to be a partial squat as far as the lower body is concerned. But look at the squatting. A really wide stance, like what you would think of as almost a sumo stance for squatting versus, say, an inside shoulders or at shoulder width. They both use the same amount of quad. Okay, they use the same amount of quad. You use a lot more adductor and abductor. Right, there's more muscle involvement with a wider stance. Far more muscle involvement with the same amount of quad activation. Yes, that quad activation has been found with studies. So if you're only doing your stuff with a narrow stance, you're developing a muscle imbalance. And so then when you try to go over and sumo deadlift, because let's say you've been narrow stance squatting, you don't have the musculature in your lower body to go wide. Because narrow doesn't carry over to wide. Wide will build all the muscles to go narrow, but it doesn't work the other way around. The reason I do all my squatting with a wide stance these days, including my hip belt squats, I do those really wide, is to build all that musculature, and then I'm fine. I don't mind doing narrow deadlifting. But I could go over and do sumo at any time if I wanted to, because we've used the wide stance squats to build it. And so I would suggest to you, if that's an issue for you, use the wide stance box squat to build those muscles. Alternatively, adding in really wide stance hip belt squats would be a good solution as well if you want to get the best of both worlds, right? That would be your best solution. You need to build your strength in that wide stance. And that's better done with squatting than with pulling. All right, next question. How much would you say your training methodology has changed in the last few years, both based on your personal experience and new research? Just a general question I'd like to hear your thoughts on. It's changed tremendously. And for me, it was not the issue of not having access to information. I've always been up to speed on what these different coaches and lifters around the world do. Conjugate, I've always been familiar with it. I think people forget with the conjugate method, when I was new to YouTube, I did the whole West Side system. I had complaints about it. I had problems with it. I also didn't integrate it correctly. And over the years, I reached my own epiphanies. So even while I was going through my phase, and I had a lot of personal reasons for promoting minimalism and things, and a lot of it was because, again, accepting that my audience was largely novice, but my philosophy's changed there too. I've realized I don't need to keep people in a novice mindset. You need to get them through the novice phase as quickly as possible and get them onto more advanced programming. In a perfect world, we don't want people to stay novices. You don't want to be a novice. You want to get through there, finish all those noob gains. But my philosophy has changed to one of understanding everything that everyone does. Every coach that's out there, look at what they're doing, understand what they do, why it works, why it doesn't work. I've learned to not be dogmatic. Right? Some people be like, well, you're dogmatic, you promote conjugate. Well, that's the least dogmatic thing you can do because it integrates everything. The concept with the whole conjugate system is that we incorporate all of these performance elements and learn to weave them together. And we give ourselves wiggle room to implement new methodologies. Okay, it's a very versatile system. It's a very open-minded system. And I think that for me, the biggest change was the mindset change in my methodology, was to say that there are no rules, there are only guidelines. Okay, when it comes to training and true optimal maximized strength training specifically, there are no rules, there are only guidelines. And you have to know when those guidelines have to be broken. Okay, to not be dogmatic, and to always be looking towards what's optimal in the now. Right? What was optimal for you a year ago is irrelevant. What we have to be looking at is what is going to give the best result for this specific lifter, or for me personally, based upon exactly where I am in my weak points in my training at this moment. Quit seeking good and be open-minded towards whatever we have to do to be optimal. It's a question of saying, instead of rules, let's do what works. And always be looking to improve what works. To always have more options available in your toolbox, even if you choose not to use those options. To have the largest toolbox possible, rather than just a handful of tools that you hammer, having the largest toolbox possible with tools that you can implement, and then knowing when to appropriately implement the different tools that you have available, even if you choose to never use the ones you have. But never be closed-minded to a methodology that seems to work for the best of the best. We don't discard it just because they're genetic freaks of their own gear. We look at it objectively and say, well, maybe it does work for everybody. Maybe it works if we put in this right scenario. We don't reject these things outright. We keep our options open. And I would say that's the difference in how my methodology has changed. Right? It means we don't have to be stupid about stuff. We don't do stupid stuff if we have something that works better. We don't remove it for something that's silly just because someone suggests it. But we need to look at what the best coaches and athletes in the world are doing at all times and figure out why what they're doing works. And figure out if we can implement elements of it to our own training. All right, next question. Hey Jason, can a late novice lifter do deadlifts or their variations like RDLs or good mornings and pendlay rows 3 times a week if they don't have an access to a power rack for squatting? Thanks. Those aren't variations of the... What are you talking about? That's not a variation of the deadlift. That's a row and 2 different hip hinges. Well, let's come over and ask the question. If they're a late novice and we don't want to be running full body anyways, we do upper lower. Okay, we do upper lower. All right, so you're at home, you don't have access to a power rack. I got a guy with that situation right now. We do Zercher speed box squats. Let that one sink in. And no, this is not a weak guy. This is not a 300-pound squatter. It's not a weak guy like that. He does Zercher speed box squats. Tell me you can't do any squatting just because you don't have a rack. So let's come over to the point. No, we do them twice a week, upper lower. Now, rowing, we can be doing back work, upper back work and things all of our training days, right? Upper days, lower days, doesn't matter. But late novice, they should run an upper lower. You can be doing them twice a week. You don't need to do them 3 times. You can get plenty of training volume twice a week, especially since you don't have access to a lot of ways to squat. You don't have a rack. All right, you don't have a rack. All right, fair enough. But you find a way to do some straddle lifts, though. right? You could do some hip belt squats with that barbell as a straddle type lift on top of 2 boxes if you had to. That aside, the other point, there's no need, right? You could do a max deadlift day. You could do a speed deadlift day. You can do good mornings afterwards, right? You can clean up. If you need to be fatigued first, you could do 3 sets of RDLs. So you're fatigued, so you can get away with a lighter weight on the good mornings. And you could clean and push press a weight up for a good morning and do three sets of good mornings afterwards. And then, you're going to have to push press it back up off there. Set it back on the ground. Why couldn't you do that? Why couldn't you even just run a conjugate template with just a barbell? Of course you can. Of course you can. You have to be creative. Be creative with what you have. Got a guy right now who's running a template like that. Doesn't have a rack at home, but he's got a barbell. He can do speed work. He doesn't have enough weight to do real work, but he can do speed work. So that's what we do. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 2.